Well, I wish you all a very good afternoon, and it's been a little while now since last time I came to speak at one of these days for Mary. I think the last time it might have been in Maddington. Would that be right? Probably, yes. Going back a little while now. And I thought, because in the calendar of the year we're approaching very closely to the feast day of the Annunciation, that it would be appropriate, I think, for us just to reflect a little on this most extraordinary event in the life of Mary. I had the opportunity, probably about 4 years ago, to go with a group of people from Perth here to Italy, and part of that pilgrimage was where we went to Loreto. And in Loreto, as you know, there is a house. In this beautiful basilica, in the centre of this basilica, there is this house that has been built from what we think are the stones that formed the original house in Nazareth, where Mary and Joseph and the child Jesus lived. The tradition about this house is that it was somehow transported to Loreto. And as these stories have come down to us about how that came about, it is said that angels brought this house to Loreto from Nazareth. We're not altogether sure if that's exactly what happened, because on one other occasion in history, Englishmen were confused with angels. In the days of the Romans, one of the first of the emperors to conquer parts of England brought back some captives to Rome. And of course the Latin word for Englishman, of course, is Angle. The Angles were one of those original groups of people that lived in Britain. And of course, Angle and angel are very closely related. So it's quite possible that during that period of the Crusades, that the house was in fact brought to Italy by a group of crusaders in order to protect it, as many other relics and many other holy things from Israel were brought to Europe about that time. Whatever about the theories, we are fairly certain that this house, in fact, is made of stones that originate in the town of Nazareth. On another occasion, I had the opportunity to go to Nazareth when I was visiting Israel, and to go to the basilica in Nazareth, built around the cave. The cave would have been the original part of this dwelling, and little by little, the house would have been built at the front of this little cave. And this is the house that we believe that the Holy Family lived in. The Annunciation is given its place, the event is given its place in that particular house, where Mary is visited by an angel. We think that Mary was a very young girl. She was only about 14 or 15. And we also think that Mary lived in Jerusalem, very close to the temple, very close to an area where, which was called the Shepherd's Field, very close to the temple where the sheep were kept. those lambs, especially that would be sacrificed in the temple, were kept in this area adjacent to the temple. And it was likely, we think, that that was where Mary grew up. That's where her family lived. And we know that she was betrothed to Joseph. Joseph lived in Nazareth, so not very far from the basilica where this cave is, where the house originally was. There is another house, and this is the house of Joseph. Mary was betrothed to Joseph, and she would have gone with him to Nazareth. And that's why it's there that she receives this vision of a real angel. And this angel is the one who gives her that magnificent mission to be the mother of Christ, to be the mother of God. There's a book, and I was looking before I came in to see whether this book is on sale outside. It's a book called Catholicism. It was written by a priest from America called Robert Barron, and some of you might in fact know of it. He uses the title that was a phrase written about or given to the church many, many hundreds of years ago, describing Mary in these words. This chapter on Mary that he wrote is entitled "Our Tainted Nature's Solitary Boast." What a beautiful phrase. Our tainted nature's solitary boast. Mary has been that inspiration for artists, for poets, for hymn writers, for theologians, for all of those in the church who have sought to understand more deeply this young woman. Even here in the Archdiocese, a man who was not a Catholic, in fact, probably didn't believe in God at all, Robert Juniper, produced a most beautiful painting of Mary, which is in the Bateman Parish Church. Even he was in some way drawn to this amazing young woman, and that painting is a reflection of his consideration of who she was and what she did. How she was this young woman whose heart was so open to the Lord, that she was open to the graces of God, and therefore became this amazing woman, a model for us all. But let's get back to the Annunciation. And I think it is the Annunciation itself that gives us a clue as to why Mary has become so popular, not just in the Catholic Church, but in other Christian churches as well. We know the story, don't we? The angel appears to Mary, and he announces to her that she's been chosen to be the mother of Christ. And it's as if the entire world goes silent, waiting for her to give her answer. And there's a bit of that suspense that you can find in this beautiful writing of the Gospels about the Annunciation. There is this pause. What is interesting, first of all, I think, is that there is this invitation. There's an invitation that is given by God to Mary. He doesn't force her. It's a non-violent invitation. It's not forced. God respects the freedom of Mary and her dignity, and at the same time, this author Robert Barron puts it, he encourages her to be curious about this event and the message and what it might mean. So the Annunciation, in a very wonderful way, gives us a very clear understanding of the nature of God. God respects us, he respects the gifts that he gives us, and he never forces. He encourages us, leads us to the life that he has to offer us by invitation. The other point that the Annunciation brings to mind is that in Mary we see humanity at its fullest. What I mean by that, and some of the great fathers of the church have written about the Annunciation, about Mary, and they've always contrasted Mary's faith and her willingness to serve the Lord, to be open to his will, contrasted Mary to Eve. Because there are two great moments in our human history, two great moments of decision. The first one, of course, right at the very beginning, was the one that Eve participated in, where she had to decide whether or not to take that fruit, to reach out and to take that prize that was before her. And that prize was, in her mind, to assume the right to decide what is good or what was evil. And in that story in Genesis of the fall, we see how Eve falls because she is convinced of a lie, the lie that the devil puts to her. And that is that you don't have to obey God. You see, in the Genesis account of Adam and Eve and the fall, you have this beautiful story of how God said to them, you are free to use anything that I have put into this magnificent garden, except for one thing. And the lie that is put to Eve by the devil is that God is being mean because he won't allow you to exercise your freedom fully. He puts a limit on your freedom. You can eat of all the trees but that one. And he says, don't be deceived, because he's jealous. It's as though they are now the rival for God. Instead, if we read this beautiful story in Genesis, we can see the generosity of God. He wants us to exercise all of the powers, all of the gifts that he has put into our lives. He wants us to exercise those to the full. Again, if we go back to the early great fathers of the church, some speak of this, and they speak about the Garden of Eden as being the full range of possibilities and opportunities that are available to us. So humans are engaged in all sorts of different activities of mind and action. We involve ourselves in politics, in philosophy, in art, in science, even in developing relationships with other people, friendship. So God was saying to us, as he entrusted this universe to us, exercise all of the powers that I have given you. All of those gifts that I place in your life. Make them count. Let them not lie there as some sort of potential, but let them be things that we use in order to bring about a new world in which there is the possibility of love, in which there is the possibility of people being raised so that they will know God and love him. So we get back to this prohibition. Why did God forbid them using the fruit of this one tree? Because we're not rivals of God, and God is not jealous of us. He's given us these gifts of intellect and will. He's given us those abilities in our lives in order to develop beautiful relationships with other people. Well, Father Barron in his book argues that God restricted Adam and Eve. He restricts us too. He's asked us not to reach out and assume for ourselves that divine prerogative to decide what is good and what is evil. He wants us to leave that to him. And why? Simply because God wants us to fall in love with him. What Father Barron means by that, I think, will come out if you listen, I hope patiently, to an extract from that chapter on Mary. When two people meet, he writes, and are mutually attracted, they use their reason and their powers of perception and analysis in order to assess each other. To fail to do this would be irresponsible. Yet their relationship will come to life only to the extent that in the end they surrender to each other. As the phrase has it, they fall in love with each other. We witness something similar in the arts. Great musicians such as Daniel Barenboim or Eric Clapton, all masters of their respective musical instruments, each comment that he plays his best when he lets his instrument play him, when he surrenders control and lets the music seize him. God has no interest in dominating us. He wants us to use the full range of our intellectual and moral energies when relating to him. But he also wants us, finally, to let go and to fall in love with him. This is why he prohibited Adam and Eve from grasping at the uniquely divine prerogative of knowing good and evil. Not because he wanted them to be less alive, but because he wanted them to be fully alive. This Annunciation story is really showing us in the life of Mary, but also in our lives too, the way in which God, having given us these gifts of freedom and intelligence and those deep desires in our lives, that at no time does he want to take those away from us or reduce them, diminish them. In the story, we find that when Mary is told by the angel that she is to be the mother of the Son of God, and she hasn't, as she says, known a man, her understanding of what is happening is being stretched to the very limit. What can it all mean? How can all this come about? And so she's left, given her freedom, given her integrity, given her intelligence, she is left with the only thing that she can do, and that is to surrender to the power of God. Surrendering in the sense that Father Barron has written. Falling in love with God, with the love of God, and trusting in that love of God. That plan of God is something that she can trust. That plan of God is something that will deliver great benefit to her and perhaps to the world. She doesn't know exactly how it will unfold. But having been stretched to the limit of her understanding, all she has left is trust. And so she says, I am the handmaid of the Lord. So unlike Eve, Mary doesn't grasp at power. She isn't disobedient, she's quite the opposite. And in her obedience, in her obedient response to the Lord, she's able to say, may it be done to me according to your word. This is what makes Mary intriguing, because she poses for us a challenge. Just as she is a model, she poses for us a challenge. Are we able to say that we have fallen in love with God to the extent that we can surrender to him? That we can let go? That we can trust in his love? Especially at those times when it is very hard to do so. So I finish by saying this very simply, that the Annunciation in the life of Mary, in our lives too, can bring about a paradox. In Mary, by letting go, by saying yes to God, not finding the strength, perhaps even the courage, but being able to let go and allow these gifts of God to flood into her in a wonderful way, she becomes the richest of people, the most powerful of people. So in her poverty of understanding, she gains these wonderful graces. And that's why the angel can say to her, you are full of grace. You are someone who is deeply disposed to receive the gifts of God. And in that way, she becomes so rich. And that paradox is there for us in our lives too. That question comes many times in our lives. When we reach that moment when we are called to let go, to surrender, that our thinking, our understanding, our strength of will seems to fail us. And we need to say to the Lord, Lord, let me experience this work that you wish to do within me. Let my heart be open to what it is that you're calling me. The paradox is that when we do that, we receive that power, that strength, that grace to live life to the fullest. So hopefully these little reflections help us today as we gather and we dedicate this day to prayer. Above all, thanking God for the gift of Mary, Mary who is our model of the Christian response to God. We thank the Lord for the gift of Mary and her faith and her openness to that will of God. And we pray, I hope, that we will have that courage to do the same, to have that same courage that would say to the Lord, let it be done in me. Give me that grace to surrender to you, to the good that you propose for my life, even if I cannot see it or understand it.